Hi, I am Elise, and at my parents' 35th anniversary, my mother didn't just disown me, she shattered my existence with a toast. To all my children, except the failure who shames us. Her eyes burned into mine as the room laughed. I rose, dropped a damning document on their table, and vowed they'd choke on their lies. This is the story of how I turned their betrayal into a reckoning they'll never forget. I arrived 20 minutes early. That wasn't typical for me, but flying all the way from Denver back to Savannah alone, I needed a few minutes to collect myself. The sky was soaked in the kind of golden light photographers chase, and the waterfront venue looked like it had been polished to perfection. I wore a burgundy dress, sleek, elegant, not trying too hard. My heels clicked against the marble floor as I stepped inside, with a small square box under my arm. Inside was a framed photo collage I'd spent weeks putting together. My parents' wedding, their first house, Mom holding my sister at the hospital. Even one rare snapshot of Dad lifting me onto his shoulders at a Veterans Day picnic. My hands had trembled a bit when I wrapped it, not from nerves, but some complicated knot I hadn't untangled yet. I stopped at the welcome board near the host stand. Names were printed in scripted gold lettering. Couples, mostly. Mr. and Mrs. Carver, Nora and Gabriel, and then at the very bottom, +1 unknown. I stared at it. I knew it was me. No name, Mom? Already rewriting me out? I whispered to myself, my jaw tight. I didn't react outwardly. Just a breath in, a small smile. I'd told myself, you're not here to prove anything, you're just here. Inside, the space glowed with string lights and champagne flutes already raised. Someone played soft jazz on a baby grand piano. A server in black passed by with a tray of truffle crostini. Look who finally made it, a voice chimed. I turned. Nora, always Nora, strode toward me in a floor-length amethyst gown that sparkled like it came with its own spotlight. Her husband trailed behind her like a shadow in designer loafers. Before I could say hello, our mother appeared beside them. Darling, she called to Nora, pulling her in for a kiss on both cheeks. I stood still for a moment, expecting something. A glance, a nod, anything. Instead, she said loudly, "Doesn't she look just radiant tonight?" "And me, Mom? Invisible as always?" I said, my voice low but sharp. She ignored me, turning to greet another guest. I cleared my throat and moved toward a group of cousins. "Elise, hey, still doing that tech stuff?" one of them asked. "Cyber security consulting?" "Yeah," I replied. "Oh, right," he said, clearly uninterested, turning to ask someone else about their vacation in Corsica. Later, I crossed the room to the gift table. It was draped in velvet, overflowing with things wrapped in gold and silver. No one looked as I added mine, carefully placing it between a bouquet and a massive wine basket. I was halfway back to my table when Gabriel, Nora's husband, stopped me. "Excuse me? Could I get a club soda?" he asked, glancing at my burgundy dress. "I don't work here," I said, walking past him. My assigned seat was at the far end of a long table. The place cards glittered with gold foil names, except mine, printed in plain black ink. I was squeezed between a cousin I barely remembered and a realtor my dad golfed with. Then I noticed it. Everyone's napkin had their embroidered initials in gold thread. Everyone's but mine. Mine was plain white. My mother passed by, glanced down, and laughed. "Oops, must have forgotten yours, sweetie. That's what happens when you RSVP so late." "Or when you want me erased," I muttered, my eyes locked on hers. She patted my shoulder like I'd spilled something. Dinner came and went with clinking glasses, endless toasts, and the kind of polite laughter that meant nothing. I hardly touched my plate. Then came the moment. The lights dimmed, and my father stood. 35 years, he began, with this incredible woman by my side. He gestured toward my mother. Applause. She rose next, lifting her flute high. "I just want to say..." Her eyes swept across the crowd. "I'm so proud of all my children except the loser." She said it looking straight at me. "Care to name that loser, Mom?" I called out, my voice cutting through the laughter. Her smile faltered, but she pressed on, ignoring me. There was a beat of stunned silence, then laughter, chuckles. Someone even clapped. I felt the heat rise in my chest. Not anger, not even shame, just something raw and hot burning behind my ribcage. I stood slowly. The room hushed. I walked toward the center table, every step deliberate. I pulled the small folded paper from my clutch. My hands were steady now. I placed it down beside the cake knife. My voice was calm. "This is a legal document, revoking the power of attorney you pressured me into signing 5 years ago. It's no longer valid." Then I added softly but clearly, "Happy anniversary." I turned and walked toward the door. I didn't need to see their faces. I'd already memorized their silence. And then a scream tore through the room. Her voice sliced through the air like glass breaking, and I didn't even flinch. I kept walking out the banquet doors, past the valet stand, down the gravel path toward my rental car. The wind off the water had picked up, tousling my hair, cooling the heat that still lingered under my skin. 25 minutes later, I unlocked the door to my Airbnb. It was a restored carriage house tucked behind an old federal-style home in the historic district, quiet, unassuming. I stepped inside, let the door close behind me, and kicked off my shoes. They landed with a dull thud. Still in my dress, I sat down on the rug by the coffee table. Not the couch, not the bed. I just sank. My brain replayed it. Not the speech, not the insult. It was the moment after. That split second when my mother opened the envelope and saw what I'd placed inside. Her eyes? That look. It wasn't confusion, it was panic. Pure, unfiltered panic, like someone who'd just realized the curtains were on fire and everyone was watching. "You thought I'd stay silent forever, didn't you?" I whispered to the empty room. I stared at the quiet room around me. I wasn't crying. I thought I might, but there was nothing left to spill. I got up, turned on the kettle, and pulled down a tea bag from the kitchen shelf. Chamomile. My grandmother used to brew it after tense family dinners. "Some things you steep slowly," she'd whisper, meaning far more than tea. While it steeped, I opened my suitcase and pulled out a worn folder I'd brought with me, one that held a handful of old awards and certificates I didn't hang up anymore, not because they didn't matter, but because they never mattered to them. The steam rose, curling like questions I'd asked myself too many times. And suddenly, I was back. Back at that charity gala 12 years ago, Mom was being honored for her work with the local literacy program. I had stayed up past midnight for 5 weeks designing her slideshow, scanning old photos, syncing the timing with the music, triple-checking every quote. I sat in the front row, proud, nervous even. When the spotlight hit her, I smiled so hard my cheeks ached. Then she stepped to the mic, "And I want to thank Nora," she said. "She's been my rock, always knows how to help me look my best." Applause. I blinked. Waited. That was it. Nothing about the slideshow, nothing about me. Later that night, I asked her about it in the parking lot. "I didn't think you'd care," she said, pulling out her keys. "You don't like attention anyway, right? I cared enough to build your moment," I'd said, my voice breaking. She'd just shrugged, unlocking her car. No apology, not even a shrug. I told myself it didn't matter, that I was being childish, but deep down, something in me curled up and went quiet. I sipped my tea, let the silence answer for me. Another memory came uninvited. High school graduation. I was valedictorian, straight A's, scholarship offers. 12 minutes into my speech, Dad stood up and walked out. I saw him glance at his phone before leaving. Later I found out Nora had called about a client meeting. He never came back inside. That was the day I stopped looking toward the front row for approval. Even when I succeeded, I was invisible. And when I didn't need them, I became inconvenient. I sat back on the bed now, wrapping my arms around my knees. It was never about me failing. It was about me not fitting into the image they wanted to present. I didn't marry someone flashy. I didn't stay in Savannah. I didn't use their connections. I built my life elsewhere, quietly. So they labeled me difficult, ungrateful, not because I was, but because I refused to play a part in their little pageant. My phone buzzed beside me. I picked it up. Wendy's name lit the screen. I hit video. She appeared in her kitchen wearing glasses and holding a mug bigger than her face. "I saw the news," she said gently. "How are you holding up?" "Not broken," I replied. She smiled. "That's a start." I told her everything, the speech, the envelope, the way the room cracked open when I stood. When I finished, she sipped her tea. "You know what the worst kind of wound is, baby," she said. "The one where you still think it's your fault they cut you." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. She could see it on my face. "Breaking away doesn't always look graceful," she continued. "But you didn't embarrass anyone. You interrupted a lie. That's different." "They'll never see me as anything but a burden," I said, my voice low. "Then stop waiting for their eyes to open," she replied firmly. I sat with that, let it settle in my chest. The truth wasn't messy. It was clear. They kept doing it because they thought I wouldn't leave. And I never had. Not really. Not until tonight. I opened my laptop, pulled up my email, drafted a message to my financial advisor. Subject line, changes to family trust involvement. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. For the first time in a long while, they didn't tremble. I started typing, but just as I hit save, my phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen in over a decade. The moment my finger left the save button, the screen dimmed, then lit up again with a soft vibration. One name in bold, centered on the display, Malcolm Reed. I froze. Malcolm was my father's former business partner. I hadn't heard his name in over 14 years. Not since the company restructured and the stories around Malcolm's quiet exit started making their rounds like cheap wine at a wedding. But that wasn't why I hesitated. He wasn't family. So why was he calling me now? I answered out of muscle memory more than logic. "Hello." There was a pause, a slight rustle of background static. "Then, Elise?" His voice sounded older, more gravelly than I remembered. Careful, like he was choosing every word through a filter of regret. "I heard what happened last night." I didn't respond. He continued. "It shouldn't have gone that way. But that wasn't just her being cruel. That was fear talking." Another pause, then a low, exhaled sentence. "There are things you deserve to know." "What things? Tell me now," I demanded, my heart racing, on in the phone. "Check the trust's original filings," he said, then hung up. Before I could ask what things, the line went dead. I stared at the screen, still holding the phone to my ear like it might say something else if I waited long enough. But it didn't. Just my reflection on the black glass blinking back at me. Something inside my gut shifted. I stood, walked to the kitchen counter, and pulled my laptop back open. "Years ago, my mother had asked me to sign something for tax purposes," she'd said, rushing through it like it was nothing. "Just a few technical forms, you know how trusts are," she'd laughed, waving her hand like she was swatting away a fly. I was 24, still trying to be helpful, still trying to earn some invisible currency they never intended to cash. I opened my secure archive, a digital vault I rarely touched anymore, reserved for old business contracts and encrypted backup. I typed a phrase I hadn't used in years, trust transfer agreement. There it was, dated 9 years back. I clicked page 1, boring legalese. Page 2, my signature right beneath the paragraph transferring administrative rights of the Carver Family Trust, originally set up in my name, to a secondary party. I stared. That was my name, my slant, but the way the ink curved wasn't right. My E didn't usually tail like that, and the pressure. It looked too even, too mechanical. I scrolled back and forth between that and a document I'd signed around the same year, a freelance cybersecurity contract from when I lived in Boise. I pulled them side by side. Same year, same legal context, same name, different handwriting. My skin prickled. I texted Wendy, sent her a photo of both signatures. 10 seconds later, her reply. "Do you remember how long your mom studied your handwriting before forging your school permission slips?" Sat very still. The quiet wasn't peaceful anymore. It was surgical. I reread the trust transfer again, this time letting the words burrow deep. Full control and discretion. Binding agreement. Irrevocable, unless challenged by signatory. Signatory. That was me, but I never signed it. And that document, it had been used, filed, acted on. I picked up my phone again and called Elliot Warner, a lawyer in Miami. I'd helped him clean up a cybersecurity breach 8 years ago. He owed me one. He answered on the third ring, still groggy. "Elise, you good?" "Not really," I said, and explained everything. The call, the document, the fake signature. Elliot's voice sharpened. "Send it over." I did. He read it live with me still on the line. "If this is real," he said, his tone shifting from sleepy to sober, "this isn't a family squabble. It's fraud. It's identity misuse, potentially asset theft." "Can we nail them for this?" asked, my voice steady. "If the evidence holds, absolutely," he replied. He was quiet for a second, then added, "Do you want me to start digging?" Quietly. I nodded, though he couldn't see. Yes. After we hung up, I shut the laptop, stood by the window, and watched the light drizzle roll down the glass. The Savannah sky was thick and colorless, like it couldn't decide whether to rain or clear. I remembered something else then, a different kind of memory. I was 18, standing in our family's summer cabin in Maine. Dad was pacing the porch, cigarette between 2 fingers, explaining how he wanted to build a new venture, a tech-forward investment arm. "You'll be part of it," he'd said. 20% just for loyalty." I'd beamed. That was the first time he'd ever said something like that. A week later, when I followed up, he waved it off. "There was a system error. The draft was lost. We'll revisit it next quarter." That quarter never came. And just like that, the offer disappeared along with every other one they ever made me. But Nora? She was named on nearly every document I'd come across on the scholarship fund, the property trust in Tybee Island, even the health proxies for both our parents. And here I was, looking at proof that I hadn't just been ignored. I'd been strategically removed. That's when I knew I hadn't just been erased emotionally, I'd been erased on paper. The sun had just started to dip when I slipped on my coat. The air outside had that sharp kind of cold that cuts through even the warmest spring light, like the day couldn't decide whether to be welcoming or cruel. It matched how I felt, walking into that cafe courtyard. Familiar bricks, polished tables, ivy creeping up the back wall. It hadn't changed since the last time we all came here together. That was years ago. I'd been home for a weekend. Nora had just closed a real estate deal, and Mom made sure everyone knew. I'd quietly paid the check. Now, I was being summoned. Nora's text had arrived that morning, simple and dressed in false olive branches. "Mom wants to meet, just us 3. No yelling." That last part told me everything. I didn't respond right away. I sat with it. Let the weight of those words land where they wanted. By late afternoon, I'd answered, "Fine, I'll be there." Not because I trusted them, I wasn't walking into a trap. I was stepping into a lab. I wanted to see what shape the manipulation would take this time. They were already seated when I arrived. My mother in a navy shawl, her glass of white wine half full. Nora, of course, had the seat with the view. She always had the seat with the view. "Elise," Mom said with a smile so sweet it stung. "Thank you for coming. You look lovely." I pulled out the chair across from them and sat, keeping my coat on. Nora leaned over slightly. "We just thought it would be good to clear the air. That night, it got out of hand." Mom nodded, folding her napkin in that way she always did, the shape of a little leaf. "I may have overreacted. You know how I get after wine." I didn't flinch. I didn't shift. Instead, I folded my hands gently on the table. "You embarrassed yourselves," I said quietly. "All I did was finally believe you." Nora blinked. Mom's smile flickered, but didn't vanish. "I'm not here to yell," I continued. "I'm not here to fix anything. I'm here because I don't want there to be any confusion about where I stand." Mom's voice softened into that tone she used when pretending to be the bigger person. "Honey, we've always loved you." "Then why forge my name?" I asked, my voice like steel. Her face froze, but she said nothing. The server came by, probably sensing the chill, and asked if I wanted anything. They ordered a hot tea. Nora leaned forward, then, her tone shifting. Look, I'm going to say this as kindly as I can, okay? I really wouldn't dig too deep into old documents. It only opens wounds best left closed. My tea arrived. I added honey, stirred once. I looked up at her. You're right, but wounds only close when the knife's removed. You're threatening us now, she hissed, her eyes narrowing. I'm promising justice, I replied calmly. She blinked once. Mom sipped her wine. There was no denial, no outrage, just that simmering, silent discomfort of people who had long assumed they were above question, now being questioned. I glanced down at the napkin in front of me, folded just like hers had been at the anniversary party. Neat little leaf, so elegant in its weaponized civility. I picked it up and slowly flattened it out. Then I refolded it into a tight square, sharp corners, even edges, and slid it across the table. Consider that, I said quietly, the last thing I ever fold for this family. I stood up, leaving my tea untouched. The cafe's door swung shut behind me, and with it, the last echo of Nora's voice dissolved into the savannah wind. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. My legs moved on instinct, carrying me down cobbled sidewalks and past brick storefronts. The red of the sunset stretched low across the street, glowing off windows like it was trying to burn the past clean. But I knew better. By the time I reached my car, I already knew what I'd be doing in the morning. So when the next day arrived, dull gray light pressing against the curtains of my rental, I was ready. I skipped breakfast, tied my hair back, pulled on a black wool coat and flats that could take a full day's walking without complaint. The Savannah Public Records Archive sat at the edge of an older district near a row of historic homes and a bakery that smelled faintly of paper, time, and coffee grounds someone had dumped down the wrong sink. I stepped up to the main desk and gave the clerk a smile. Hi, I'm looking to access any publicly filed property titles or trust records that list the surname Carver, particularly Elise Carver. He raised an eyebrow. Any specific date range? Broad as it'll let me search. He keyed it in. We do have a sealed estate addendum tied to that name filed about 9 years ago. I froze. Did you say sealed? He nodded, distracted by his screen. Means someone filed an amendment to an existing family estate document. Usually involves real property or legacy trusts, but sealed ones? Those are tricky. Can I request access? He gave me a side eye. Not directly, but you can file under a Freedom of Information derivative. If there's anything public adjacent, like a connected deed, you might get something. An hour later, I had filed that request. Another 5 hours after that, they called me back with a dusty envelope labeled Carver Trust Subtransfer Property 171E, filed by Beatrice Carver. I opened it in the adjacent records room, hands steady but tight. There it was. A deed transfer, a clause that authorized partial control of a real estate investment trust, signed off with full consent by none other than me, except I never signed it. The scrawl was close, hauntingly so, but the tilt of the letters was too sharp. The way my e-looped was always rounded, not hooked like that. The trust in question, the very portfolio that had funded the estate on Isle of Palms, the same house my parents still lived in, the same house I'd helped pay for during renovations, thinking it was just a loan. They'd transferred legal control of the entire vehicle to Nora, using my name. They stole my future, I said aloud, my voice trembling with rage. Outside, the cold air no longer felt clean. It bit. Back at the condo, I dropped my purse and went straight for the filing cabinet I kept beneath the hallway mirror. I pulled out old tax returns, legal letters, anything that might tie back to that trust. I didn't cry, not when I found it, not when I realized how deep it went. But I did sit and stare at one picture on the wall. Me and Nora, arms linked, laughing on a pier somewhere during college. There was a time I truly thought we were allies, sisters not just by blood, but bond. We shared a dorm fridge, a bad breakup, a bottle of wine stolen from Mom's cabinet. She cried on my shoulder when her first engagement fell apart. I defended her when Dad said she was reckless. How long ago was that? 15 years more. At some point, I'd stopped keeping track. I turned back to the tax files. One envelope stood out, yellowing at the edges with a rubber band around a set of old 1099s. And then I saw it. A letter from the IRS, dated 11 years back, noting a charitable contribution of REIT shares by Elise Carver, used to establish the Carver Future Scholars Fund. Wait, what? I never donated shares. I never authorized anything. My signature wasn't on that form. But Nora's was. In fact, the entire fund, one I'd seen featured in the family's Thanksgiving letters, was named in her honor. A legacy of generosity, the tagline read, in celebration of Nora Carver's dedication to education. She had donated my assets in my name, with Mom's help, then had a scholarship named after herself. For a split second, I felt like the wind had been knocked from me, but it wasn't shock anymore. It was something deeper. Fury, not loud or theatrical, but steady, purposeful. I stood in the middle of the living room and let out a single scream. Not words, not questions, just sound, then silence, then work. I opened my laptop and printed every file I'd found. Deeds, tax statements, photocopies. I highlighted dates, labeled pages. I stacked them into a clean, bright red folder, the kind you couldn't miss, even in a pile of chaos. Across the cover, I wrote one word in bold block letters: truth. The folder sat untouched on the kitchen table the next morning, catching light from the windows like a warning flare. I stared at it while sipping cold coffee, not because I'd forgotten to heat it, but because my mind had already left the room. The decision had been made the night before, not just to act, but to go. I wasn't ready to unleash what I had gathered, not yet. But I needed something else, confirmation. I folded the folder in half, slid it into my leather tote, and grabbed a small wrapped box from the counter. On the surface, it looked like a peace offering: white ribbon, embossed paper, a polite anniversary card. In truth, it was a decoy, a prop for a role I no longer played. Traffic was light as I made the short drive to the estate. Mom and Dad's house sitting grandly behind wrought iron gates, manicured lawns and hedges that had always looked like they'd been trimmed with tweezers. The sky was a slate gray, clouds low and heavy, but the wind hadn't picked up yet, just the kind of weather that made a place feel like it was holding its breath. I rang the bell. The chime echoed through the house I used to live in. Footsteps approached, fast, uncertain. The door cracked open, and there she was. Mom. Her hair was pinned just so. Earrings that sparkled but weren't too flashy. She blinked twice, almost as if checking to see if I was real. I smiled, calm. I just wanted to drop this off, I said, setting the gift box on the counter. Thought it might be nice for the mantel. She smiled too quickly. That's thoughtful, dear. The tea steeped, while silence filled the room like fog. Then I asked, You never meant to include me in the dinner, did you? Her fingers paused mid-stir. I thought you'd be too busy. You live so far. I tilted my head. Busy being your ghost or Nora's tax shelter? She flinched. Not dramatically, just enough for me to know I'd hit the right nerve. You always were too sensitive, she muttered. Sensitive enough to catch your lies, I said, my eyes unyielding. I didn't stay long. By that evening, I was back at the condo with no appetite. The kettle hissed, but I didn't make tea. Instead, I scrolled mindlessly through emails until a forwarded message caught my eye. It was from a colleague I hadn't spoken to in years. Subject: Thought you should see this. Attached was a screenshot of a post from Nora's Instagram. I didn't even follow her anymore, but the caption was unmistakable. Grateful for the trust Dad placed in me. Building legacies one generation at a time. She was standing at a charity gala podium, dressed in a crimson pantsuit, like she'd walked off the cover of some glossy Family Empire feature. Behind her, enlarged for effect, was a framed document. The document. The REIT paperwork with my name forged on it, my consent fake, my signature stretched like skin too tight over a lie. Do you flaunt my stolen legacy? I hissed at the screen. I stared at the image for so long the screen dimmed. No comment, no reply, just silence, but not the kind they mistook for surrender. I opened my laptop, dragged the legal files into an encrypted vault I used for work, backed them up twice, printed copies once again, labeled, cross-referenced. Then, without ceremony, I opened my phone calendar and erased every entry tied to Nora. Lunches, calls, even her birthday reminder. They'd had their chances. I'd let them explain, deflect, minimize, but with every silence I'd given them, they hadn't grown. They'd taken it as permission. I closed the laptop, breathing slow and even. They wanted me invisible. Fine. But ghosts don't stay quiet forever. On the morning of the anniversary party, I ironed my teal silk dress until the creases laid flat like the expression.